What's up, guys? Jared here to review episodes 2 and 3 of season 25 of South Park. Now, before I begin, I just want to say that I've finally created my Twitch channel. I'm going to be trying to stream Elden Ring. My name is Kalsarikanit87, so please follow me on that. Kalsarikanit is a word in Finnish. I currently live in Finland, and the word means underpants drunkenness, which is clearly a word that could only exist in such an advanced society. So, today we're going to be talking about The Big Fix, Episode 2, and City People, Episode 3. And I think that both episodes are very funny. I think that this has been a really good run for South Park so far. So let's start out with Episode 2, The Big Fix, in which we learn that Token's name is actually Tolkien, I guess. The masterful irony of this episode is that, essentially, in trying to remedy their perceived racism, both Randy and Stan act more racist. So let's start off with Randy. So the conflict that Randy is facing is essentially that those who have been most affected by the war on drugs have been locked out of the new wealth creation that the legal weed industry is creating, essentially black people. And this is a real problem. It's a very ugly asymmetry in American society, and it's one that we should aspire to fix. And I just want to take a second here, if you'll afford me a little detour, because the last episode that I made was about Ben Shapiro, and something that Ben Shapiro says about systemic racism is that he basically defines it as the notion that history has consequences. Now, the thing about this is that he's right. That is what systemic racism is, but the problem is that framing it as an unchangeable law of physics. I mean, of course, history has consequences. I mean, that's, there's nothing more redundant or obvious to say than that, but framing it like such suggests that nothing can be done, and we should just let things go on as they are, because I guess implicitly the assumption is the system is already perfect, which of course is absurd. It's also absurd to suggest that the system can't also get worse, but anyway, back to South Park. So, systemic issues create problems that need to be fixed, but the question is, how? Randy's answer is to include black people into Tegrity Weed as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, Randy doesn't care about social equity and only aligns himself with Token's family to protect his business. He makes Token's dad a partner, not because he's an extremely competent co-executive at a financial consulting firm, but, of course, because he's black, thereby actually tokenizing him. And this is where the episode gets quite clever. So Randy, he takes a picture with Token's family at dinner, using them as a prop in his attempt to accumulate more social capital, which in this episode we see very directly translates into real capital. And later in the episode, Randy doesn't value the ideas that Token's dad is bringing to the table. Token's dad supposedly being the Ben to his Ben and Jerry, or maybe it's the Jerry, I don't quite remember. Because Token's dad wants to name strains of weed after Lord of the Rings characters and settings, but the fact that Randy doesn't care about any of his ideas shows that Token's dad's inclusion is only skin deep, or that Randy only values the color of his skin and not the content of his character. Now, if you guys will afford me another aside, I just want to say that I invoke Dr. King's timeless words here with respect to his immeasurable contribution to the progress of race relations, but I don't idealize the notion of colorblindness as the end-all answer to racial conflicts, because suggesting that we judge people only by the content of their character fails to recognize how social influences can and do mold one's character. It assumes that we're magically endowed with pure, immutable character by God. But as an atheist, I don't accept this. And in a lot of ways, I think this woke movement, if that's still what we call it, is an attempt to address the impact of these socially constructed outcomes. But as the episode very nicely points out, people's efforts are often counterproductive. Unfortunately, the fight for social equity is an incredibly complex issue that requires incredibly complex solutions. And in a time where people's political positions are built with memes and tweets comprised of watered down ideas, Watered down wokeness is way uglier than colorblindness, which, despite its shortcomings, is actually quite profound in its simplicity. But anyway, back to South Park again. So now I want to talk about credigree versus tegrity. Credigree being the new farm that Token's dad founds, and his new strain of weed being called credigree, like there's credibility to him being authentically black. And I think that the end of this episode ending on that is really clever. It's also very cynical, not unlike most South Park episodes that talk about social issues, but it's also a very humanist note, because both Token's dad and Randy are marketing a kind of authenticity, but really it's just opportunism. So the name Tegrity and Randy's fake country drawl is an attempt to convince people that by buying his product, they're distancing themselves from the alienating forces of modern life and reclaiming a more authentic, earthy existence. Tegrity as an idea appeals to our desire to reclaim our agency by vicariously living off the ideas of living off the land and working with your hands. Now, what's really clever is that credigree is essentially the same thing, but it's the black version, a kind of black authenticity. Because instead of the fake country drawl, Token's dad uses fake Ebonics in an attempt to convince people that by buying his product, you can experience the kind of ego-inflating vitality of rap culture, of being a so-called real one. The white customers at the end of the episode say they're looking for something with more street cred. Again, this appeal to authenticity, but kind of the urban black kind of authenticity. Because credigree, similar to tegrity, appeals to the desire to reclaim agency and self-reliance, but the version as it's mythologized in rap music by saying, screw the system, sell drugs, do whatever you need to do to get your money right, and take control of your life. Again, the episode ends on a very humanist message, albeit a cynical one, because black people are just as likely to be seduced by cynical opportunism as white people. Because one of the big follies of woke culture, or whatever we're calling it, I don't even know if anyone self-identifies as woke anymore, but victimhood does not breed sainthood. And Token's dad, you know, he said at one point in the episode that he doesn't even believe in drugs and alcohol, but once money enters the equation, everything changes, and he changes his whole persona, or at least he performs a new one. So as far as Randy's plot, super clever, really, really insightful. I think this is a really good episode. All right, so now let's talk about Stan. When he learns that Token's name is actually Tolkien. So again, similar to what Randy experiences in his arc, is that by trying to fix his mistake of thinking Tolkien's name was Token, Stan, ironically, ends up tokenizing him. So in one part, Stan says the class, Garrison's class, hasn't done enough to make sure Token doesn't feel isolated and left out, and yet in the scene, Token is being singled out and not allowed to be in the class as they discuss him, so again, being literally isolated. Then in the episode, we see that Stan ends up wearing these pretentious glasses, and he's constantly waxing poetic about Tolkien and showing just how much reading he's been doing and how much he now understands J.R.R. Tolkien and how much he knows about Lord of the Rings. And this is all an attempt to wash himself of one of the most undesirable stains on one's reputation today, the accusation of being a racist. But again, his attempts to educate the school about J.R.R. Tolkien, like in one scene he says that we need to have a J.R.R. Tolkien Appreciation Day in order to greater understand our classmate Token. But this is really all more about him needing to feel not racist than actually giving Token any form of recognition. Because as Token says, he doesn't care about Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. He thinks it's just a bunch of nerdy, jive-ass dragon shit. In another part of the episode, Stan is told by a doctor that in order to not be racist, or in order to redeem himself from the quote-unquote crazy thought that Tolkien's name could be Token, is that he needs to do a lot of reading, and he needs to do it from the perspective of a black person. And this is actually one of the funniest parts of the episode to me, is because then when we hear Stan reading, it's from a voice that's coded as black. But it also shows how asking white people to inhabit the perspective of a black person is an example of how white people's attempts to not be racist just oftentimes result in more awkward forms of racism. In fact, when the Doctor tells Stan that thinking that Tolkien's name is Token is an unconscious bias, which it's obviously not. I mean, in previous episodes, I mean, his name is Token Black, he wears a T. It's obviously a joke about him being the only black kid in elementary school or in South Park Elementary. This kind of reflects how accusing people of unconscious bias can sometimes be a kind of gaslighting that's really utilized to further distance the accuser, the person accusing someone of being racist, from that most undesirable of social stains, that big old scarlet letter R for racist. And lastly, I just want to say, his name is still Token. It's not Tolkien. His name is Token Black. In the episode, Stan says, oh, but there was a time when Cartman wrote Token's Life Matters on his shirt and it was spelled that way. And then Cartman basically says, oh, that's how you spell Tolkien? Huh, that's silly. But I mean, even Token himself has spelled his name as Token. In the Honey Boo Boo episode, we see Token Black Productions, and it's spelled Token. And you know, South Park is a show that doesn't take its own lore seriously. It will sacrifice its own inner logic for the sake of a joke, which is what's happening here. And I think, again, Trey is doing something that I respect. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if it's, especially when a show is like 300 episodes long and really doesn't have a foreseeable end. Who cares about the lore? All that matters is that you get people to laugh. And I really respect that. All right, so The Big Fix, great episode. Really thought it was funny. And again, I think that it's about time that somebody out of Los Angeles talks about woke racism. Anyway, so let's talk about City People now, the most recent episode. This episode obviously reflects on how the pandemic has killed American cities. I mean, if you can work online, then why live in an expensive sewer drain full of abject poverty and obscenely in-your-face wealth inequality? And I'm going to be speaking about this episode from my experience in Los Angeles, since I lived there during the beginning of the pandemic, and to be honest, I don't miss it even a little bit. Also, South Park is produced in Los Angeles, so I think they are largely drawing inspiration from the current state of Los Angeles. One thing that I really appreciate about this episode is that the real estate agents are portrayed as people who don't actually do anything, that don't actually have any skills. It's just an emphasis on artifice. All they have to do is take pictures and be likable. And this is particularly appropriate in a city like Los Angeles, where all the real estate agents are just out-of-work actors, or people that aspire to be actors but have to have some way of making money. So you'll find a lot of people that are very good-looking, who are very used to, kind of inhabiting characters, so to speak, and being very focused on their appearance. I mean, because at the end of the day, what the episode is kind of pointing out is that real estate agents are what I like to call cheerleader jobs, like pharma reps. Your job is to be likable and good looking, because ultimately you're not really enhancing the product much. The real estate agent doesn't really make the house any more livable, just like the pharma rep doesn't make the medicine any more efficient or cost effective or anything like that. Also, God, the arching your back thing and just arching more and more and more is so funny. I don't really have much more to say about it other than that. The other thing that this episode does is it equates city people to pigeons, because they sound like pigeons, and like pigeons, they're a nuisance. And there's just so damn many of them. They just parrot rich people stuff like Pilates, oat milk, Teslas, Wi-Fi, bottled water in a pigeon-like coo. Pigeons are common to cities and are a nuisance, just like city people. They even loiter outside City Walk like annoying pigeons and gather around smorgasbords of LaCroix, Cortados, oat milk, and edamame. And, the heart of the episode's message is what Lou Kim says not so subtly, is that city people are city people. They will bring their city way of doing things to South Park and expose them to their city ideas. And of these city ideas that city people espouse, one is perceiving themselves as higher than the rural people. When Cartman shows houses, there is a sense that the city people, their purchasing power is so much higher than the rural people that it almost dehumanizes them by equating the people as furniture in their own houses that can be easily taken out. Because when Cartman is showing like Craig's house at one point and Tweek's house, I think it is, they are showing it while they're still living in the house, suggesting that the people living in the houses can just be bought and moved around, not unlike furniture. And I really like how the South Park residents, they get absurdly high prices for their homes because these real estate agents cynically operate under the mantra that something is worth whatever someone is willing to pay. And now this is true, but when it comes to marketing, it really does seem to fall under this new paradigm in marketing that actually my friend Diego mentioned in our recent Matrix video, that marketing's job is to promise a better product than can actually be delivered. Because if you're not promising a better product, that means you're potentially leaving money on the table. And when it comes to pigeon-brained city people, who are so rich that they have no sense of value, they could be easily molded by the kind of marketing spectacle that convinces you that LaCroix is better than cheaper seltzer, or that MacBooks are worth the $1,000 price difference of its competitors, or that how good-looking and nice and cool that a real estate agent is actually reflective of a higher price that you might have to pay for a home. It does seem like everything is becoming Cyberpunk 2077. If you're not promising more than the product actually delivers, again, you're leaving money on the table. And in that kind of very cynical sense, I don't think Cyberpunk was an anomaly. In some ways, I think it is the future of marketing. Anyway, guys, that's it for me today. Please subscribe to my Twitch channel. Again, it's there in the corner. Culsuricanit87. It means getting drunk in your underwear, not leaving the home, and not having any real social aspirations other than just getting drunk and chilling hard. So Culsuricanit87, I'm going to be streaming Elden Ring when it comes out next week. Really excited about that. And then, you know, we'll just see what happens. I don't know if I'm going to be any good at streaming, but I'm excited to try it. Also, be sure to check me out on Instagram, @FatherOfWoody. Links for both the Twitch channel and the Instagram page are in the description, so please follow me there. Looking forward to making more content, and as always, please subscribe to the channel, and check out the short that I did on the new Bond movie that came out earlier in the week. It was a fun experiment. Would love to hear what you guys think of it. And that's it for me, guys. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.